So the topic of today's lecture is going to be random samples and order statistics. So we're really going to kind of get a real small taste of kind of what statistics is and how statistics builds off of probability. And this would kind of be, in some ways, cover part of, say, an introductory lecture to 452, although the material is kind of classically covered in probability courses. So let us first start with defining what a random sample is. So you hear this word a lot in kind of an introductory statistics course or in a survey sampling. You hear this a lot. And from a probabilistic standpoint, a random sample is just going to be a set of random variables that are independent and identically distributed. So if x1 to xn are our random variables, we're going to say IID, and we're just going to generically say they're IID F, where F is some distribution. There's some distribution. Either a PMF or a PDF. We don't specify it in the terms of the definition, but you would generally specify it. And so they're IID, they are independent of each other, and they all have this distribution according to F. Then we call the x sub i's, this collection of x sub i's, a random sample from this distribution, or this population, F. And it's a random sample, we could say, of size n from F. So really a random sample to kind of a statistician who's, or to a mathematical statistician who's thinking about everything probabilistically, is just some random variables that are IID from some distribution. So why this is important is a fact we saw last time, but we're going to highlight again. So here's the fact. If my x sub I are a random sample, then we can look at the joint distribution of these x sub I. So I'm going to write it like this, F under tilde x. So my under tilde is just my shorthand notation for x1 to xn. So this is the joint distribution of all the x sub i's. So we could write this as fx1, x2 to x sub n. And we saw last time that because of independence, that's not spelled right, mathematician, not an English major. Okay, so because of independence, we can break this up. We can write this as just the marginals. So this is the product of the marginal of x1 times the marginal of x2 times all the way times the marginal of x sub n. That's because independence. We have a theorem that says that the x sub n's are independent if and only if I can do this. I can write this. But we note that they are not only, that because they're a random sample, they're not only independent, but they have the same distribution. So we're going to kind of use notation a little bit, but we're just going to say this is f of x1. All these f's are the same, so let's just drop the subscripts. This is a slightly different f than the joint. This is the marginal f. Back up in my definition, this is this f that we're talking about. And we can succinctly write this as just the product of I goes 1 to n of f of x sub I. And this follows because identical distributions That is, the random variables are identically distributed. So altogether, we have that the joint is just the product of the marginals, of the product of this distribution f, and we plug in the different x of i's. So this is a really important governing fact. It means that for a random sample, our joint distribution has a really simple form. It's just the product of whatever the underlying distribution is, n times, and we plug in x1, x2, x3, all the way up to x of n. So this independence and this identical distribution make the joint distribution very simple. And that's going to help us reason about statistics or random variables. So given the definition of a random sample, we can define, it's kind of a letdown of a definition of a random sample, we're just redefining IID. We can also define what a statistic is. And this is, again, a little bit of a letdown of a definition, but what we say is that if we have a set x of I goes 1 to n, so if these x of I are a random sample, then a function t, which takes in a number, vector in Rn, so it takes in n numbers and spits out one number. Then let's say if t is a function from Rn to R, we say that if we plug our random vector into t, we call this, we say t of x is a statistic. So all that a statistic is a function of our random sample. So we have a random sample, x1 to x of n, random samples from some distribution f, and we have some function from our sample that gives us a single number. We say t of x is a statistic. That is the function of our random sample as a statistic. So again, we're just kind of redefining a function of a random sample or a function of a multivariate random variable as a statistics. And typically we think of these things, of the x's as being a random sample. This may seem like a strange definition, but it's more or less what we think of when we think of a statistic. A statistic is a summary of a bunch of numbers. So if I have n numbers, I summarize them into one number. We call that a statistic. And so if I have n random variables, we summarize that into a single univariate random variable, t of x, that's called a statistic. So we go from our n random variables in the random sample to the one univariate random variable, t of x, and that t of x is called statistic. So examples, for example, say 1, the mean, or more formally called the arithmetic mean. So typically we define this as x bar is 1 over n times x1 plus x2 plus x3 all the way up to x of n. That's a very classic statistic, x bar, the mean. It is a function, so if we have x's that are a random sample, we can consider, so t is some function Rn to R, where t of x1 to xn is just my formula, x1, 1 over n times the sum of x1 to xn. Then if we look at this t of x, where x is a random sample, is a statistic. So all statistics are, they are functions, more or less, that summarize the random sample. Other examples of a statistic, say sample variance. Sample variance might be defined oftentimes as the symbol s squared, and this would be typically as a formula of 1 over n minus 1 times the sum, I goes 1 to n, xi minus x bar squared. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that you would learn in an introductory statistics course called sample variance, but we could call this thing some t of x1 to xn. It's some function that takes in n numbers and spits out a single number, say s squared, and so it's a statistic. And you could look at how the statistic behaves depending on the random sample, the underlying distribution of the random sample. This function of that random sample, called a statistic, in this case the sample variance, will behave differently. And so that's basically the field of statistics, which is trying to understand, depending on what the underlying distribution is of my random sample, how does my statistic behave? That is, how does my function of that random sample behave? There's lots of ways we can talk about behavior of them. And that's basically 452. And so we've been harping, there's a whole class on multivariate random variables, bivariate random variables, and transformations of them. And the reason we care so much about them is because statistics is about transforming random variables, transforming sets of random variables called random samples. So some other examples of statistics that we might be interested in, and we're going to talk extensively about today, are so-called order statistics. So order statistics are, so first of all, the simplest order statistic is the minimum. We're going to write it as x sub 1 with little parentheses around our 1. This is the minimum of all of our random variables. So we observe the n random variables and we pick the smallest one. And so you could denote this as the min I goes 1 to n of the x sub I. Other order statistics, x sub n is going to be the maximum of all of my random variables, all of the values, or all of the random variables in my random sample. And you could denote this as max I goes 1 to n of x sub I. So minimum and maximum are two kind of extremes of the order statistics. But we can more generally define x sub r to be the rth smallest value among x1 to x sub n. So that's called the rth order statistic. So x sub 1 is the minimum, x sub 2 is the second smallest, x sub 3 would be the third smallest, x sub 4 would be the fourth smallest, and all the way up to x sub n is the largest, or the maximum. Other statistics, you can kind of derive from there. You can derive range, you could derive median. Those are derivative of our order statistics. So range of our data is the maximum minus the minimum. So you might denote that as R. It's supposed to read range. Let's write that legibly. Median, which is typically defined, let's say if m is our median, is typically defined as x of n plus 1 over 2. That is the n plus first, over 2 smallest thing, if n is odd, so it's kind of the middle value if we have odd, or it's kind of the average of the two most close to center values if n is even. So that's typically how median is defined here. So those are some kind of examples of order statistics. And just to kind of give you a little bit of a flavor of things we're interested in when we talk about statistics. So we have something called a sampling distribution of a statistic. So this word comes up all the time in an introductory statistics course. The sampling distribution of X bar, the sampling distribution of this and that, right? So typically you'll talk about these things. And just to connect the dots to the introductory stat course is that the sampling distribution of a statistic, say t of x, is simply the distribution of t of x. So when you really get to kind of advanced statistics courses, you don't really use the word sampling distribution. You just know x tilde is a multivariate random variable. T of x tilde is a function of that. So this thing is a univariate random variable. That's t of x. The whole t of x is a univariate. And so it has a distribution. And that's, often in introductory stat courses we call that a sampling distribution, but kind of just say, yeah, it's the distribution of t of x. And so the idea is, in statistics, is to study all these properties. What are the properties of a statistic depending on what the underlying distribution is? How do I find good statistics? How do I evaluate statistics? What are the asymptotic properties of these things as a sample size grows large? So these are the kind of things that statisticians worry about. And so if you take a course like 452, or if you don't, you can at least appreciate now, having taken probability, you now have the tools to talk about all of these properties because you understand what random variables are, what joint distributions of random variables are, and how to talk about transformations of random variables, and that's all you do when you talk about statistics. Okay. So today we're going to talk about order statistics. So this is typically covered in the probability class, although it has a bit of a statsy feel. I think it's a kind of very core classic probability topic. So order statistics. So kind of the simple, maybe not quite the simplest, but some nice statistics talk about can we derive the distributions of order statistics. So minimum, let's look at minimum. So our notation is x of 1, again, is notation for the minimum over I goes 1 to n of all my x of I. So henceforth, we're assuming that we have some random sample x of I goes 1 to n is a random sample. And x of 1, or the minimum, the first order statistic, is the smallest of these. And so the question is, what is the distribution of this thing? What's the minimum? What's the distribution of x of 1? It's a univariate random variable. So some function of these x of I. The function is particularly, we look at the x of I and we choose the smallest one. It's not a particularly nice function, at least it doesn't appear to be. It's not just like squaring it or summing them. We've looked at some other simple functions like that. So how can we talk about the distribution of x of 1? And we actually had a homework problem maybe partway through the semester where we basically showed the trick about how to solve this. So what we're going to do, so you can think of x of 1 as just a univariate random variable. And so we can talk about, say, what is the probability that x of 1 is bigger than some value t? And the minimum being bigger than some value t means every value, x1, x2, x3, etc., must be bigger than t, right? If the smallest is bigger than t, all of them are bigger than t. So asking for the probability that the minimum is bigger than t is the same thing as saying what's the probability the first one's bigger than or equal to t, and the second one is bigger than or equal to t, and the third one is bigger than t, etc., all the way to the last one is bigger than t. Now we can use the fact that we are talking, these x of I are a random sample. And so they're independent. And so this is, I can distribute my probability. It's the same thing as saying what's the probability x1 is bigger than t times the probability that x2 is bigger than t times the probability that x3 is bigger than t dot 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 times the probability that xn is bigger than t. More succinctly, we could write this as the product, I goes 1 to n, of the probability that x of I is bigger than t. Okay, now we assume, so this is independence, and they all have the same distribution, and they have some CDF, and let's call it capital F. The probability that x of I is bigger than or equal to t is 1 minus the CDF of x of I evaluated at t. It's 1 minus the probability it's less than or equal to t, and that is the CDF. And since all of them have the same distribution, they all have the same CDF f. And so we can simplify this and say this is the product. I goes 1 to n of 1 minus the CDF. And now we have no dependence on I. In fact, we can just say this is 1 minus the CDF at t to the nth power, because all those terms in the product are exactly the same. And so we started off with the probability that that the minimum is bigger than or equal to t, and we've got an expression for that. So let's just write that down. What we've derived so far is that the probability that the minimum is bigger than t is 1 minus f of t to the n. Okay. So how does that help us get the distribution of the minimum? It's a PDF of the minimum, or PMF of the minimum. The minimum is a univariate random variable, and so it has a CDF. The CDF of the minimum, let's write it like this, f sub minimum, f sub x of 1 at t, is 1 minus the probability that x of 1 is bigger than t. So the CDF at t is the probability x sub 1 is less than or equal to t, or 1 minus is bigger than or equal to t. And we just derived what that is. So this is 1 minus capital F of t to the n. So this capital F without the subscript is just the PDF of any of the little x of i's individually. And with our subscript x of 1, it's the PDF of the minimum. Okay, so this is true for continuous, discrete, whatever we want. In the case of continuous random variables, so now we gotta make a caveat that this, what we're going to talk about now, will only work for continuous random variables. Continuous random variables. If I want to get the actual PDF of my minimum, I know all I have to do is differentiate, well, let's just say d dt of my CDF. That's true for univariate continuous random variables, which the minimum will be, and I have a formula for what the CDF is. It's 1 minus f of t to the n. And now I just have to differentiate this with respect to t. And I get negative 1 minus f of t bring down the power. I have to bring down an n, and then I have to take a derivative of the inner, which is just going to negative f of t, where little f of t is the PDF of any of my little individual x of i's themselves. So altogether we get n by 1 minus f of t to the n minus 1 times little f of t. So this is the PDF for a minimum. So the PDF for a minimum in the continuous case here, so PDF for minimum in the continuous case can be derived from f, which is the CDF for each of my x of I, and little f, which is the PDF of my x of I. So little f is my PDF, capital F is my CDF, but I can derive the PDF for the minimum with this formula. It's n times 1 minus f of t to the n minus 1 times little f of t. And so if you give me what the distribution of my underlying random sample is, you give me that as little f and correspondingly capital F, that those two kind of go together and tell you about what my underlying random sample has as distribution, I can give you the PDF for the minimum according to this formula. So that's really cute. So we can derive a distribution for the minimum. We can play this whole same game for the maximum. And we can do something similar. I'm going to go through this one pretty fast. For the maximum, if I want the CDF of the maximum, x sub n, at t, this is the probability that the maximum is less than or equal to t. Whoops, that should be the maximum. Come on. Okay. Now, if the maximum is less than or equal to some value, all of them must be less than or equal to that value, because the largest one is. So this is the same thing as saying the first one's less than or equal to t, the second one's less than or equal to t, all the way up to the last one is less than or equal to t. So every value in my random sample is less than or equal to t. I can break this out into a product because everything's independent. So I can write it like this. This is the probability that x sub I is less than or equal to t. And because they all have the same distribution, if capital F is the PDF or the CDF of each of the individual x of I, it's the same for all the x of I. Probability x of I is less than or equal to t. It's just capital F of t. That's a CDF at t. And so we have no more dependence on I. This is just f of t to the n. So this is true up to this point for all random variables, discrete or continuous. And for continuous random variables, if I want the density function, the PDF of my maximum, all I have to do is differentiate this thing with respect to t, and what I get is n f of t to the n minus 1 times the little f of t. And that just comes from the chain rule for differentiation. So that similar process can give us a distribution of the maximum. So why don't we look at an example here? We can apply these formula. Okay. Example. Let my random sample, x sub I, be IID from an exponential distribution with parameter lambda for my rate. So they're all independent. They all come from an exponential lambda distribution. Okay. And so if we recall, this means that the PDF has the form lambda e to the negative lambda t. This is true for t, I'm sorry, negative x. If we use x as a variable, it's lambda e to the negative lambda x. And this is true for positive x, it's 0 otherwise. And the CDF we get through some integration is just 1 minus e to the negative lambda x. Okay. So let's get the distribution for the minimum and the maximum of a bunch of exponentials. Fx of 1. So the PDF for the minimum, our formula was n 1 minus the CDF to the n minus 1 power times the PDF. So it's n 1 minus the CDF is just e to the lambda t n minus 1 power, and then the PDF is lambda e to the negative lambda t. So if I simplify things, I get n lambda, and then I get e to the negative n minus 1 times lambda t times e to the negative lambda t. And I can simplify further. I get n lambda e to the negative, add those two together, n lambda t. So if I group things this way, what we see is that this is the PDF of a different exponential, of an exponential where in the variable, instead of having parameter lambda, it has parameter n lambda. So the story is that the minimum of exponentials is exponential again, but instead of having parameter lambda, it has parameter n lambda. So that's really nice. And I've chosen this example with exponentials because it is very nice. In general, we don't necessarily get a distribution we know. And the minimum can have very strange distributions that don't have names. But in the case of exponentials, the minimum of an exponential is just a different exponential. We can also look at the maximum. So let's do that. The PDF for the maximum has the formula n times the CDF to the n minus 1 times the PDF. So in this case, we get n times 1 minus e to the negative lambda t to the n minus 1 times lambda e to the negative lambda t. And that's about as simple as it gets. This is not a known distribution, but it is what it is. So this is the PDF. Now you could go and you could calculate expected value. You could do all your normal stuff you want given this PDF. It just doesn't have a name, so it's not quite as nice. We don't have any facts memorized about the exponential distribution, about the maximum of this exponential. But it has a PDF, and so one could go through and use it, and we can kind of know everything we need to know about the maximum of these exponentials because we know the PDF. Okay. So the minimum and maximum are kind of special cases where you get kind of relatively nice formulas. We can ask more generally what the distribution is of the rth order statistic. So I'll write this as a theorem, why not? So x sub r is our rth order statistic, is the rth smallest value among our random sample, which is x1 to xn. So when r is 1, we get the minimum. When r is n, we get the maximum. But generally, you can have the second smallest, the third smallest, the fourth smallest, etc. In this case, the PDF, so if the x sub I are continuous, we can get a nice closed form for the PDF of the rth order statistic. The formula, it is n factorial over r minus 1 factorial n minus r factorial. And then we multiply by the CDF of the x's. So f of t to the power r minus 1. 1 minus the CDF of the x's to the n minus r power. Then we multiply by the PDF. So again here, capital F is the CDF of the x sub i's. Little f is the PDF of the x sub i's. And otherwise, I think it's pretty well defined here. Not obvious why that's the answer. But if you notice, so what I'll say is that notice when r is equal to 1 or r is equal to n, that is, when we're looking at the minimum or the maximum, we get the previous formula for the min and the max, right? For the PDFs of the min and the max. So if you plug in r is equal to 1 or r is equal to n, a lot of these terms will drop out, and you'll get the previous formula that we just derived related to the min and the max. Okay. So that's the formula to remember. We can talk a little bit, kind of a hand-wavy heuristic proof here. So let's just talk about why this formula seems reasonable. Okay, so imagine my number line here, and I want my PDF at t. So I'm going to look at the interval t to t plus delta t. And if I were to look at kind of the probability that, well, let's write it down here. The PDF of my rth order statistic at t is basically, it's going to be look a lot like the probability that my rth order statistic is between t plus delta t and t. And if I take my limit as delta t goes to 0, this should give me basically what my, kind of in some kind of hand-wavy way, this is what my PDF would be at t. It's kind of like, look at this interval from t to t plus delta t, and if I shrink delta t to 0, I kind of shrink that interval, and the probability of being in the integral and the limit is going to give me my PDF. So what's the probability I'm in that interval? It depends on the underlying distribution, right? So I'm going to have, if x sub r is somewhere in here, so this is x sub r. So the rth smallest is there, and that means if only x sub r is in this interval, and as I shrink down, that means this is going to kind of mean that the probability x sub r is there is at t, right? So if x sub r is there, I better have, in total I have n values, so I'll have r minus 1 values less than it, and I will have n minus r values bigger than it, right? This is defined to be the rth smallest. So there better be r minus 1 things smaller than it, and correspondingly the rest of them, the n minus r of them, must be bigger than it. So what's the probability that this situation occurs? That the rth smallest is in t to t plus delta, r minus 1 of them must be less than t, and n minus r of them must be bigger than t. Okay? They're all independent, so we should just be able to multiply probabilities. So as I shrink delta t to 0, this interval is going to get smaller. This is just going to basically be the PDF of, of any of the individual random samples being at t. So the probability that I have some value in t to t plus delta is going to be just the density at t. As I kind of shrink my interval smaller and smaller, that's what my density represents, kind of the infinitesimal probability I'm in that region. The probability that r minus 1 of my values are less than t, it should be the probability that any of them is less than t is f of t, and if I have r minus 1 of them, it's f of t. Since they're independent, it should be f of t to the r minus 1, because I can just multiply the probabilities because they're independent. And correspondingly, the probability that any of them is bigger than t should be 1 minus the CDF, should be 1 minus f of t. And if I have n minus r of them, since they're independent, I can just take the product or raise that to the power of n minus r. So if I kind of have a selection of things, there are of my random sample, and I want r minus 1 of them, the probability that r minus 1 of them are less than t is f of t to the r minus 1. The probability that kind of in the limit that x sub r, the r smallest, is in this interval is f of t, and the probability that we have n minus r of them bigger than this interval should be basically f of t. And because everything's independent, I should just be able to multiply these. So I should get something like f of t to the r minus 1, 1 minus f of t to the n minus r, times a little f of t. Now that's almost our formula, but there's some factorials out front. And the reason that we have those factorials is because I can do some rearrangements without hurting anything. So overall, I could rearrange things in n factorial different ways. It doesn't matter which of my, if x of 1 is the rth smallest, or x of 2 is the rth smallest, or x of 3 is the rth smallest. We actually care which of them. All we care is that the rth smallest is in this interval. So I can kind of rearrange them in any way I want. But I have to account for that fact that some of these rearrangements give me kind of identical, are kind of already accounted for in our probability. In fact, we don't want to double count the fact that these r minus 1, we could rearrange those in any order and it wouldn't affect anything. We could rearrange these n minus r in any order and not really affect anything in our probability calculation. So we're going to divide through by the number of ways we can reorder things there. So this is kind of a hand-wavy proof of where my theorem comes from. You could, if you formally do it, you have to think about all the limits correctly. We're not going to go into that detail, but this kind of tells you where this comes from. So the factorials out front come from the fact that I can rearrange my data. I don't really care which one I call x of 1 and which one I call x of 2. I just care about which is what the value of the rth smallest is. And then these other things come from the fact that we have r minus 1 smaller than t, n minus r bigger than t, and 1 kind of at t. Okay. So why don't we look at an example of applying this. Example. So let's assume we have a random sample. So the IID, and our underlying distribution is a uniform 0, 1 distribution. So little f of t, that is the PDF of each of these, is just 1 as long as t is between 0 and 1. And the CDF of t is just t as long as t is between 0 and 1. So in this case, if I look at the rth order statistic, my formula says that this should be, the PDF of it is n factorial over r minus 1 factorial, n minus r factorial. I multiply by f of t to the r minus 1, 1 minus f of t to the n minus r, and then I multiply by the PDF. In this case, I can plug in my values, so I still get my factorials out front. Capital F is just t, so I get t to the r minus 1, 1 minus t to the n minus r, and the little f of t, this thing, is just 1. So as long as, this is true as long as t is between 0 and 1, but this is my PDF. And what you might not notice immediately, but I'll claim, is that this is the PDF of a beta distribution with parameters r and n minus r plus 1. So the story overall is that if I have a random sample of uniform numbers, the rth order statistic, that is the rth smallest value, will have a distribution, a beta distribution with parameters r and n minus r plus 1. This is super useful practically, because the uniform is a nice kind of simple distribution. Okay, so we have the distribution of the rth order statistic alone. And just to make things more difficult, we can also talk about what if we want to look at two order statistics at the same time. So this is going to basically be the joint distribution of two order statistics. Okay, so let's write down the theorem. So this is the joint distribution of order statistics. Okay. So if we have two numbers, r and s, so r is less than s, then x sub r is the rth smallest, x sub s, let's write it like this, script s is the s smallest, and surely it should be that x sub r is less than x sub s, right? If r is less than s, the rth smallest, the second smallest should always be smaller than the third smallest. We can ask for a joint distribution. Let us say f of xr comma xs, and let's say at the value u and v. So u is going to be the value for x sub r, and v is going to be the value for x sub s. So if we ask for the joint distribution of these, the formula is even more fun than last time. It is n factorial divided by r minus 1 factorial s minus r minus 1 factorial n minus s factorial. So that's the constant out front. We're going to multiply. So u is our value for x sub r, f of u to the r minus 1, v is the value for x sub s, f of v minus f of u to the s minus r minus 1 minus f of v to the n minus s. Now this is supposed to be a script s. And then we multiply by the PDF at u and the PDF at v. That is a doozy of a formula. That is a real difficult formula. Don't expect you to memorize it, but it's good to know, and it's good to have seen, and kind of have a little understanding where it comes from. So this is the joint distribution of the rth and s order statistic. And it's a real big formula. You can see some similarities with the previous formula, but it's a little more general. And we're just gonna do a kind of real hand wavy proof here about why this formula makes sense. So let's look at the value u and u plus delta u, and then some larger value we have t. We have v. And v plus delta v. All right, so u is our value for the rth order statistic, and v is our value for the s order statistic. S is bigger than r. So we're going to do this kind of accounting where we account for how many things should be in this interval. So we're going to have one thing as we shrink delta u to 0, we're going to have one thing in that interval, namely x sub r. And as we shrink delta v to 0, we're going to have one thing in this interval, namely x sub s. And how many things will we have in the interval from u to v? We should have s minus r minus 1. So that's how many things we'll have in that interval. If s and r, if say r is s minus 1, we'll have just nothing in the interval. But if s and r are very far apart, we'll have something in there. And that leaves how many things left over? Well, how many things will be bigger than x sub s? Well, there will be n minus s of those. And how many things will be smaller than x sub r? There will be r minus 1 smaller. So those two are easy. The middle one you just got to think it's kind of has to add all together has to add up to 1. So r minus 1 plus s minus r minus 1 plus n minus s, all that should add up to 1. All right. So this is how it's going to turn out. And so our formula comes from the fact that we don't really care the labels of the various random variables. And so while we could permute them in n factorial ways, we have to account for the fact that kind of within each of these bins, we don't really care about the order there. So we already kind of account for the fact that those can be reordered. So we divide through by r minus 1 factorial, s minus r minus 1 factorial, and n minus s factorial. And then we calculate the probability of seeing r minus 1 things less than u, which is f of u to the r minus 1. And there should be n minus s things bigger than v, so that's f of v, 1 minus f of v. So this is the probability of any of them being bigger than v, and there are n minus s of those. And then the probability that we get things between u and v should be f of v minus f of u, and we have s minus r minus 1. So that's the formula we get. A quick kind of hand wavy proof, but I think good enough for our purposes. It just gives you some intuition about where this formula comes from, and it's not quite as mysterious. Let's look at an example of how to use this. Okay, so here's a fun example, and it kind of combines several things we've looked at. So let's assume that our random sample comes from a uniform 0, 1 distribution. Then if we want the joint distribution of x sub r and x sub s at, say, values u and v, we can recall what our PDF and our CDF are. This is, we get in our basement r minus 1 factorial, n minus s factorial, s minus r minus 1 factorial, n factorial over top. You get u to the r minus 1, v minus u to the s minus r minus 1, and a 1 minus v to the n minus s. So this comes from the fact that, recall, for the uniform 0, 1, little f of t is 1 and big F of t is just t. This is true as long as 0 less than t less than 1. Okay. So we'll come back to this and we'll okay, so that's the formula for it. It's not the most interesting formula, but we can actually use it to solve kind of an interesting problem. So here's the question. The question is, here's an example. Let's define my range of my data. So this is the maximum x of n minus the minimum. And the question is, what is the distribution of my range? Now, if my underlying data, my random sample, comes from a uniform 0, 1 distribution, I know what the joint distribution of x of 1 and x of n is, right? as given by this formula. And so I should be able to get the distribution of the range. How can we get that? Well, it's a bivariate transformation problem. So let's say U be R be x of n minus x of 1. And V, so we're gonna first get the joint distribution of U and some B, and then we're going to integrate out V, and that will give us the marginal distribution of the range, which is, we call it U in this case, or R, which is what we want. So if you pick V to be something simple, let's just pick it to be the minimum, because that hopefully will be simple. And so this is our setup. So what do we do in the bivariate transformation problem? So let's say this is a bivariate transformation, which is everyone's favorite type of problem. So we need inverse functions. We need to get the minimum and the maximum from U and V. So the minimum is, of course, just V. And so G1 inverse of, say, UV is just V. We want to get the maximum, so we want the inverse transformation to get the maximum. This should just be U plus V, right? That should, U is xn minus x1 plus x1, just should give us xn. So G2 inverse of U and V should be U plus V. So those are my inverse functions. The Jacobian matrix is the derivative of these with respect to U and V. Derivative of the first row is derivative of the first one with respect to U and V. With respect to U at 0, V is 1. Derivative of the second one with respect to U and V, both is just 1. And so absolute value of the determinant of my Jacobian is just 1. You can think about that. And so, altogether, what do we get? We want the joint distribution of U and V at little u, little v. This is the joint distribution of, in this case, not x and y, but x1 and xn. Well, luckily we have a formula for that. And we plug in our inverse functions. Our inverse functions are v and u plus v. And then we multiply by this Jacobian determinant, but that's just 1, so we actually don't need to multiply. All we need to do is now plug in v and u plus v into our joint distribution here, which we very nicely derived up above here. So this is what we need to plug in. So let's plug it in. If we plug in our inverse functions, u or v and u plus v, into this, what are we going to get? Well, first of all, just as an aside here, let's re-look at our formula, because we had a formula in terms of R and S, which for arbitrary, we can now look at it for 1 and n in particular. So in this case, R is equal to 1 and S is equal to n. Okay. And so let's evaluate this at, what do we want our values to be? It doesn't really matter what our variables are. Let's call them A and B. So our formula for this, if we simplify it, what was our formula? It was n factorial up top. In the bottom, we have r minus 1, so that's 1 minus 1 factorial, over n minus s, So n minus n factorial, because s is n, r is 1. And then we get a s minus r minus 1. So there's n minus 1 minus 1 factorial. And then we get, we multiply by f of, say, a to the r minus 1. Well, that's 1 minus 1, because r is 1. The difference to the n minus 1 minus 1. That's s minus r minus 1. And then we multiply by 1 minus f of b to the n minus s, but s is n, so that's going to simplify. And then we multiply by f of a and f of b. So simplify this whole thing. So we simplify this. A lot of this drops out. We just get n times n minus 1, because this thing becomes n factorial over n minus 2 factorial. And then basically everything drops out except we get f of b minus f of a to the n minus 2 times f of little f of a, little f of b. Okay? So this is our joint of the min and the max. Okay? At a and b, whatever values you want, a and b. So in order to get the joint of u and v, which was the range, u was the range and v was just the minimum, I have to plug in to this thing, this joint of x1 and xn, v and v plus and u plus v. So plug in, and what do we get? We get f of uv at little u little v. That is equal to n times n minus 1. This is f of u plus v minus f of v to the n minus 2, f of u plus v, f of v. Now, in this case, we're assuming my x sub I come from a uniform 0, 1 distribution. And so I said this a couple times, little f is just 1, and capital F is just the identity function. F of t is t. So this will simplify even more. This is n by n minus 1. And that is u plus v minus v, which just leaves me with a u. And little f's just give me 1, no matter what I plug in. So this, in the uniform case, is my joint of u, which was my range, that is x, the maximum minus the minimum, and v was my minimum. Okay. We don't actually care about that joint. What we really want is we want the joint, we want the marginal of u. So how do we get the marginal of u? Well, we integrate this joint with respect to v. So f of u, that is the marginal distribution of u, which is our range, which is what we really care about, is the integral of our joint with respect to v. Notice our joint doesn't involve v, so this is going to be a very simple integral. We just have to make sure we get our limits of integration correct. If the range is little u, then the minimum of this thing is going to be able to go from 0 to 1 minus u, right? Let's draw a little picture here, right? So everything's distributed between 0 and 1. If my range is u, it could be that my minimum is here and my maximum is here, and this distance is u, my range. Or, so it could be that my minimum is all the way at 0. Or it could be that my maximum is here, and u units down, I could get my minimum, and this could still be u units. And so my minimum could be as high as this value, and this value is 1 minus u. So my limits of integration are 0, so the smallest possible value for v, which is my minimum, is 0, and the largest possible is 1 minus that range. So I do this integral. It's a really simple integral because v doesn't show up anywhere. I get n by n minus 1, u to the n minus 2. That all pulls out. And I just get the integral dv from 0 to 1 minus u. So pulling this all down, it's n by n minus 1 u to the n minus 2 times 1 minus u. This is a beta distribution with parameters n and 2. And so since u was my range, then R, my range, has a beta n2 distribution. So that's a cute little example where we can actually get kind of a nice named distribution of the range. And it involves the joint, so it kind of involves everything we've looked at so far. It involves the joint distribution of our order statistics, which is kind of a nasty formula. It simplifies a little bit because we have uniforms. And then we do a bivariate transformation in order to get the joint of the range and something else, and we integrate out that something else. And once we do that whole thing, which involves doing the whole bivariate transformation thing, and then doing our marginalizing out the one variable, we get a nice beta n2. So if I have a random sample from a uniform 0, 1 distribution, the range is a beta n2. And so a cute little fact here is that if you look up the expected value of a beta n2, so if the expected value of my range, if the range has a beta n2 distribution, this expected value will be n minus 1 over n plus 1. And that's just the expected value of beta n2. And as n goes to infinity, so as n goes to infinity, this range, the expected value of the range, is going to approach 1. And that really makes sense given our intuition. So here's 0 to 1. If I keep adding things to my random sample, maybe I'll get that as my first sample, and then I'll get that, so my range is kind of small. Then I get something bigger, so my range is even bigger. And then I'll observe another one here, and it gets bigger, and maybe this doesn't change it. I'll keep observing values. As I keep observing values in this unit interval, my range is never going to decrease. It's just going to keep bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, hopefully, if I observe enough of these random samples, my range is going to asymptotically just be 1. It's going to be the whole thing. Because eventually I'm just going to kind of fill in this whole interval with random samples. So that's a cute little fact. So it makes sense. It seems to be reasonable. Okay. So the last thing I want to mention real quick at the end is just we've done the we talked about the marginal distributions of the order statistics. The min, the max are the easiest ones. Then we talked about generally the marginal distribution of the order statistics. Then we talked about the joint distribution of the order statistics. And the last thing, a joint distribution of 2 order statistics at a time. The last thing we could talk about is the joint distribution of all the order statistics. So let's say joint distribution of all order statistics. right? So I could look at x of 1 is the minimum, x of 2 is the second smallest, x of 3 is the third smallest, and there are going to be n order statistics. X of n minus 1 is the n minus 1th smallest, or the second largest, and x sub n is the largest, right? So there are n order statistics for a random sample of size n. The minimum, second smallest, third smallest, etc. Right? Just a reordering of our data. And so the question you can ask is, this is a multivariate random variable. You could collect these all together as one multivariate random variable. And the question is, what is the joint distribution of all these? That is, what is the joint of x1, comma 2, 3, 4, all the way up to the maximum. And we could say at values u1, u2, u3, up to un. It doesn't really matter what our dummy variable is. Okay. So the univariate distribution of an order statistic, or the marginal distribution of an order statistic, was not super intuitive. The joint was even more of a mess. So you'd expect that the joint of everything together would be a real mess. Turns out it's not. It's actually really simple. The joint distribution of all order statistics is n factorial times the product, I goes 1 to n, of the PDF of each of the values. So this is the probability that the minimum is u1, the second smallest is u2, the third smallest is u3, the fourth smallest is u4, up to the largest is un. The density of that occurring is n factorial times the product of the PDF of just the underlying random sample, that is little f, evaluated at each of these u sub I. So it's a really simple formula. The idea is that all this is just a reordering of my data. This is basically just the joint distribution. So it's basically n factorial times the joint of my random sample. And the idea is that the order statistics are just a reordering of my random sample, and there are n factorial ways to kind of reorder my random sample. So we get n factorial number of ways times what would be the joint PDF, let's say, joint PDF of my random sample. So that's the lecture for today. It's kind of we did a little bit of an introduction to random samples and a little taste of what kind of statisticians, how they take probability and run with it. And then we looked at order statistics. So this is the minimum, the maximum, and everything in between. The second largest, the second smallest, the third smallest, etc. And we looked at the marginal distributions of these things. And we looked at the joint distributions, and then we looked at the joint distribution of all of them together. And so what you imagine as you go with this is there are all sorts of statistics like the median or the range or all sorts of other statistics that are functions of these order statistics. And so the way that we derive the statistical properties of them are through probability calculations like the ones we've done today. So we'll stop there for today. Great.